This weekend, Six Underground, the Michael Bayest film that Michael Bay ever did, Michael Bay, dropped on Netflix. So today we're going to stop and rank all 14 Michael Bay films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place to consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all 14 Michael Bay films. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. As I go into this, I'm only including the movies that Michael Bay directed. Those Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle films, produced, not directed by Michael Bay. The Platinum Dune horror remakes, produced by, but not directed by Michael Bay, so those aren't included. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is Transformers: Age of Extinction. It actually breaks my heart a little bit to put this one in last because the sequences at Mark Wahlberg's house in Texas were actually filmed just about 8 miles that way from where I'm at currently, but the movie itself is kind of a total train wreck. The basic setup of the film about people trying to hunt down the Transformers for these tech companies, not a bad setup for a Transformers movies. The actual storytelling here is all over the place. Instead of having a story about characters who are transformed by going through a journey, it's just a setup for the next action sequence. Our lead characters with Mark Wahlberg and friends, they're not being transformed by this story. They're just on this roller coaster ride that we're on to give us perspective inside of it. But there's not really story here. It's just a series of chronological events very loosely tied together to set up more Michael Bay-isms all around the world. It's a big problem when your movie puts more thought into explaining why the relationship between the boy and the girl in it isn't statutory rape than they've put thought into the actual story and the characters themselves. By the time you get to the end of this movie, you're just exhausted. Coming in at number 13 is Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. When they were writing this film, a writer's strike kind of kicked in, so they just had to finish the script as quick as possible to hit a deadline, and when you watch the movie, it kind of shows as any sort of rules or logic for the world of Transformers is just kind of thrown out to have stuff happen to progress the plot line. So suddenly you have Decepticons that can transform into humans, except they behave like the girl from the movie Species and they're just kind of horny and trying to bang people all the time. Just there's not any logic inside of it. And Michael Bay's more juvenile sense of humor is like on full display here. You've got multiple dog humping sequences in the first 15 minutes of the movie. Sam's mom is eating pot brownies and tackling people on a college campus. It's all low-hanging fruit. There's no kind of depth to any of it, and it's just trying to entertain people at the most base level with explosions, robots, and very stupid middle school jokes. Next up is Transformers: The Last Night. Prior to making this movie, the producers did like this writer's room getaway where they took a bunch of different television and film writers, took them off to brainstorm ideas. They came back and they announced that they had like 16 ideas for new Transformers movies. And as you watch this film, it feels a little bit like they were walking through the halls with 16 different scripts, tripped and fell, and just kind of mashed them all back together, and that's the movie that we got. This movie ties in King Arthur, the Nazis, it's got post-apocalyptic stuff. There's like a little girl that Mark Wahlberg teams up with, and then he teams up with what King Arthur's last relative on the earth. I mean, this movie's all over the place. Optimus Prime is going bonkers inside of it. So many different plot lines happening that don't really tie together, but they kind of tie together. The only thing this movie has more of than plot lines is aspect ratios. Within individual scenes, the aspect ratio hops all around. You can see the black bars changing locations because he shot all the shots totally differently. But for me, this movie's also so weird, wacky, and all over the place. It's still a little bit charming because of that. It loops back around and becomes a little bit more enjoyable than the two previous films on this list. Number 11 is The Island. This is kind of a weird project for Michael Bay to take on. Its central premise is kind of cerebral sci-fi about technology and its uses and consumerism. And Michael Bay's kind of known for making big, flashy blockbusters that appeal more to the senses than to the mind. And you see that, or you feel that tension inside the movie as it goes back and forth between his visuals, his kind of hyperactive way of editing films, and then exploring these big ideas about what these people are being used for on the island. It's also a movie that has kind of a built into it identity crisis, as it wants to be cerebral sci-fi movie. It also wants to be big, Michael Bay chase movie, so there's a bunch of overly long spectacle chases inside of it. Other times it's a fish out of water comedy, and that doesn't appear till like an hour into the movie, and suddenly it's trying to do these kind of silly jokes about these characters not really knowing how to function in the real world. And then in the third act, it kind of turns into like a Spartacus type film. Put it all together and you've got 4 different movies crammed into one, all with Michael Bay kind of glitz and gloss. It's not really a good movie at all, but it at least moves quickly and has some great moments in it. Kicking off our top 10 is Pearl Harbor. Here you have Michael Bay giving the Titanic treatment to the events of Pearl Harbor, and the movie itself is just as kind of awful and awesome as you would imagine that would be. For the first 90 minutes, it's almost an insufferable love triangle, setting up these goofy characters with Ben Affleck getting shots in the butt and getting his nose hurt and shooting a cork into his nose with goofy Michael Bay jokes. And then the second half of the movie is Michael Bay doing a war film that's pretty decent and kind of fun to watch the spectacle of it, and has kind of pretty traditional heroism inside of it. And so he's good at kind of doing those types of cliche moments with all the rousing music inside of them. And so you kind of have two halves of a movie. One of them is almost unwatchable. One of them, it works for what it is. If you want to see big, epic battle Michael Bay visuals with a real life event, you got it. And then you have to suffer through the bizarre love triangle at the beginning of it to get there. I mean, it's a movie that you take a real life event and then center it on some fake characters in their love triangle. That's what this movie is. And there you go. Then you have 6 Underground. This movie is a shot of Michael Bay adrenaline straight into the heart, except Michael Bay had been doing some cocaine and chugged a whole 6-pack of Red Bull beforehand. I love big, obnoxious action movies. I love direct-to-video action films, and that's what this is. This is a direct-to-video action movie premise with the writers of Deadpool writing the script for it and being given $150 million. If you hear that and you go, oh, you'll hate this movie. It is way too much. It is hyperactive. It's over the top. It is all about the set pieces. If you're someone like me that likes that kind of thing, there's a lot of fun to be had here because the action really is pretty phenomenal at times. It kicks off with like a 15-minute long car chase with, people being bounced between cars being cut in half in midair. There's this big action sequence on top of these skyscrapers with these stunning Michael Bay visuals in moving camera angles of wide shots, all this crazy stuff with parkour running through a construction site afterwards. The finale is this yacht with some technology inside of it that does some wild, crazy things, all with what looks like real practical stunt work or just phenomenal CGI inside of it. If you don't like Michael Bay, you'll hate this movie. If you don't like obnoxious action movies, probably not for you. If you need to have some plot and character, you can sit this one out. But if you just want just a high-octane action movie that's got a budget that's way too big for the script that they have, this is the movie for you. Coming in at number 8 is Transformers: Dark of the Moon. This movie starts off with actually a pretty good little premise, tying the Transformers into the moon landing and both kind of giving some interesting little NASA mythology, as well as kind of expanding the world of the Transformers and the Decepticon and their history with the United States and the Earth in general. All of that I loved inside of it. I think by swapping out Megan Fox, she kind of changed up the formula just a little bit inside of the film to add a bit of intrigue where you don't just have Sam with his high school girlfriend once again saving the world. And then the actual final battle in Chicago is just pretty phenomenal. The visuals, the spectacle of all of it, very cool Michael Bay Transformers action. Now it's still very thin plot line here. It's got a number of the problems of the other Transformers sequels from Michael Bay, but of the Transformers sequels from Michael Bay, this is easily the best of the bunch. And one of the nice touches is Leonard Nimoy kind of factoring into the bit inside of it and doing a couple Star Trek lines here and there. I love that stuff as a massive Star Trek fan. So this one for me, as kind of big Michael Bay spectacle, delivers what I'm looking for. Number 7 is Bad Boys. Michael Bay's first film was actually a pretty solid little buddy cop entry into the action genre. Compared to where his kind of style goes, it seems pretty small scale, but at the same time, you still have all of the things that you come to know from Michael Bay, his sense of humor, kind of the base juvenile jokes, the moving camera, the dynamic visuals, the slow-mo, all of it is present inside of this film. So I've also got Téa Leoni inside of it, actress that I enjoy when she shows up inside of movies. So you've got a young Téa Leoni, a young Will Smith, a young Martin Lawrence, and because of that, it kind of makes the movie an interesting little time capsule of the mid-90s as you watch a bunch of these people kind of rise to fame, from Michael Bay to Will Smith, all of whom had done things before, but this is where they started to become known as these A-listers, was with this film. I don't think it pops as much as the movies that are higher up on this list, but a solid entry in the genre and a nice little first directorial film for him. Next up is Pain and Gain, a movie about a very interesting real-life event that was scripted by the writers of Infinity War and Endgame. What makes this movie so fascinating and hard for me to even place and review is that it's done with all of Michael Bay's usual bombastic style. It actually kind of nails the tone that it's going for, but it's also one of the most tone-deaf films ever made, as it's a story about real-life people that did horrible things. They kidnapped a person, they tortured the guy, and then they were responsible for killing other people, and the movie plays them as kind of these sympathetic doofuses chasing the American dream, which I find it to be a very entertaining film that has a bunch of things about it that I really like. And then there's a side to it that it's like kind of gross to enjoy a movie like this when you're like, real people died and suffered because of what happens inside of this. So I don't know what Michael Bay was going for, but at the same time, I liked what he delivered. This is not a movie for everybody. This is a movie that a bunch of people will watch it and just get a real sour taste in their mouth. But if you can enjoy a really dark comedy that touches on some stuff that's really not cool, it's a movie that's actually pretty enjoyable. Bringing us into our top 5 is Bad Boys 2. Possibly the biggest and glossiest cop action film of all time. This movie came out when Will Smith was at his peak and Michael Bay was also on the top of the world of blockbusters, and they were just allowed to have this massive, insane budget to produce a buddy cop action film, and Michael Bay's over-the-top visceral style just goes so well with this genre. It is jam-packed with memorable action sequences, from the opening one with the KKK to the freeway chase where cars are being dropped at them, to the morgue chase where they're running over dead bodies, to the shootout where the camera's just spinning in these circles, to the big finale inside of it that's just this big, over-the-top action sequence that turns into a chase. All of it is done with Michael Bay's gloss, shine, over-the-top style, with all of his big explosions with the fireworks everywhere, and Will Smith and Martin Lawrence in their primes doing their thing with their banter. All of it kind of works for me. And I mean, is this high art? Of course not. Is this a fun action movie? Absolutely. Number 4, Transformers. Michael Bay's first Transformers film is actually a really good blockbuster because at its core, it's kind of a classic, tried and true boy and his dog story, or in the case of this movie, a boy and his bumblebee, which allows us to kind of slowly make our way into the world of the Transformers while having a lead character that's interesting in kind of the movie that took Shia LaBeouf, he'd starred in movies, he'd done television, so a generation knew who he was, and kind of launched him to that A-list. It's easy to forget how good he is in this first movie because of some of the weird antics of the last 10 years. But you go back and watch this movie, and he's very likable in a naturalistic way. He feels like a real person that you could know. And so having him as our perspective character by meeting Bumblebee and kind of entering to this world, and as he learns about the world of Transformers and meets Optimus Prime and all this stuff happens, we discover this world along with him. Part of the other reason it kind of works is his family are a lot more restrained in this film, and so they feel like parents that are trying to deal with their son, that they don't know exactly what's kind of going on with him. And then even as we move into the bigger aspects of the film in the inside of the third act of the film, you get the Michael Bay spectacle without going kind of over the top. Because we care about the characters more. We're more invested in our Transformers themselves. Put it all together, and this is what the Michael Bay Transformers all should have been if they'd learned the right lessons and not just kept doubling down on the stupid, immature jokes and the spectacle. This is how to do it right. Real quick before I give you my top 3, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comments section. We're going to disagree. That's the fun part. Just keep it respectful. Also, if you've enjoyed this ranking, I've done a bunch of other director rankings. You can find that in this playlist right up here. I got Quentin Tarantino, James Cameron, Christopher Nolan, Rian Johnson, a bunch of people right up there. You can check that out right after this video is done. In third place is Armageddon. For me, this is one of my favorite Taco Bell movies of all time. If you're kind of new to that phrase, it's what I use on my channel to refer to kind of fast food entertainment. Movies that we know are kind of junk food, but we just love to watch them anyway. For me, one of those movies is absolutely Armageddon. It came out when I was in high school, and I've always just love this film. Whether you're talking about just the group dynamic of all of these oil drillers, the Michael Bay humor I think works actually really well inside of this film. It's got, of course, all the spectacle and the explosions, and then at other times it goes overly serious in a very typical Michael Bay fashion where it gets sentimental at times. It does kind of the Americana shots with the US flag and the people watching the news, and then you move into the third act, you've got sacrifice inside of it. It touches on all the things that my baby has decided to push this button while I'm filming, so my lights have turned off, and you got to see that happen right here inside of this video. Oh, we're back! But so for me, certainly as you move into the third act, like the final sacrifice could be cliche or tropey in certain ways, but it hits all the right notes for me. I enjoyed the humor. The cast here is just phenomenal. I mean, of course you have all the obvious people, but then you have like Jason Isaacs in kind of like this scientist role, and like Will Patton in this low-key great performance and great character inside of it. So this is a movie I just thoroughly enjoy. Our runner-up is 13 Hours. Michael Bay's most serious and mature film to date is easily one of his best. Instead of kind of leaning into his usual bag of tricks with the hyperactive editing and the kind of juvenile humor, instead he focuses on creating the appropriate tension for the story being told that attempts to show reverence to the victims of what happened as well as a tribute to the heroes of the story. And he focuses in doing so makes a movie that takes advantage of a bunch of his best skills, which are his visuals, creating exciting sequences, and he does it to make heroes out of the heroes of this story. It's very much a survival film. It's not about a big, intricate plot. It's about experiencing this 13-hour block with these soldiers as they try to survive, as they try and save people, and it appropriately, you feel those emotions and the fear, what they experienced in that day, that's what you feel inside of the film. But coming in at number 1 is The Rock. This movie combines all the best aspects of Michael Bay with the best version of a bunch of these Michael Bayisms, whether you're talking about the vibrant action, the corny Michael Bay humor, the fantastic cast, the kind of reverence for the military, the combination of goofiness with overly serious moments. Put it all together, and this is like quintessential Michael Bay at its best. One of those pieces I just mentioned was the fantastic cast. Of course, it's awesome to see Sean Connery in a role like this and some classic action movie Nicolas Cage, but you've also got Ed Harris, Tony Todd, David Morris, Michael Biehn, Raymond Cruz, all these other actors populating the other roles inside of it. And so the ensemble as a whole is just really pretty fantastic here. The basic premise of it, of course, is ridiculous, and that's half the fun of the movie. It is this throwback 90s action movie type setup, just done with Michael Bay exuberance. And part of the reason you can go along with the ride of this pretty ridiculous premise is that they got a central character, a central villain inside of it that you kind of believe his motivation for what he's doing and why he's trying to do all of this. Also has nice world building with the Sean Connery character and how it ties into kind of classic 60s sort of conspiracy theories about what was going on inside of America. Put all the pieces together. It's of course a goofy movie, and that's what makes it so awesome. It uses all of Michael Bay's best aspects in their best version, so it comes in at number 1. If you want more content like this video, check out that playlist right over there with all of my other director filmography rankings. Jon Favreau, Christopher Nolan, Paul Feig, a bunch of people right over there in that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.